So now, unlike scalar variables, if you want to store multiple values, we cannot do it on a single scalar variable. That means, say, I want to store my name. So I will create a scalar variable as dollar some string like this. Okay. And I can give some value to this. And then if I want to store my address, then I will create one more and some value to this. And then if I want to give my street name or pin code, whatever it is, then I have to give some value. So like this, for each value that you're trying to create, you have to create a variable and store the value in it. But now, say you're writing a program to read something with respect to your organization's details. Okay, so you have to go through each employee's details, get all the information about his uh, business unit, which building he sits in, what's his address, which seat location he works in, everything. So that means if you have 1,000 employees and we have 10 data that you have to collect, then it will be like 10 into what 1,000. So that will be very huge, right? So you cannot keep on creating many variables like this. So whenever you have multiple values that you want to be stored, then we will use a variable type called array, wherein array is nothing but a ordered collection of data. So the same thing what we can do is, rather than putting it up separately, we can create one variable of the type array and you can put all the data into it. Okay. So generally in Perl, array is represented using at the rate. Okay. And followed by the string, whatever name that you want to give. And the naming convention is the same as we have used for scalar variable. So you can give any name to the array, and if you say equal to and whatever value that you want to give, you have to give to this. So that is how it works. Okay, now when you are giving multiple values, just make sure you put it up into the brackets. So here, say for example, I can say the values that I want to store into it is my name, okay, and then my address, and then I can store my pin code. Like this, how many other values I want, I can store. Now this is equivalent to having three separate scalar variables, but you are using one array to store these single entities or a group of values together, wherein individually if you see, each one of them is a separate scalar variable that we were trying to store, but you can combine all those things and you can store multiple elements into one single variable called array. Okay, so that is how you will be using it. Now the naming convention, as I said, whatever that we followed for the typical scalar variable will be holding here, which means that I can give something like name underscore array, or I can say my values something. So I can give any string, anything, but again it has to follow the same naming convention. That is, it has to begin with the character only. You cannot give a number or a special character, and you can use underscores within the name so that if you want to have a lengthier name which has more meaning, but you cannot have something like this. You cannot have like this, but I can give a name like this, you can have it. Okay, so this is the naming convention that you want to follow. And remember, you have to always begin an array with at the rate. So the same thing, if you say dollar, say some the same thing like this, and if you try to assign value, it will not take. It will say that it's an error because you are storing multiple values. So if it is a scalar variable, it will begin with dollar and you have only one value that can stored into it. Okay, the same thing if you are going with the multiple values or different values, then you use array so that you can use one single memory allocation to store multiple values. Now, this is about how do you store. Okay, now you can add as many values that you want, but how is that you are going to retrieve the value? Because the next thing is, at any point of time in your program, you should be able to retrieve the value, because the purpose of creating an array is you can store it and retrieve it at any point of time, right? Now, in that case, what you need to understand is, in array, whatever that you are trying to see, these are called as elements or data elements. So each identity or each value is called as a element. So right now, if you see how many elements are there in this, there are three elements, right? Okay. Now, out of the three elements, how is that array is going to identify this? For example, if you want only this value or this value or this value, a particular element, how will you try to get the value from that? So now to do that, it is not a complete single value, right? Because it is three separate values that you have stored, or three separate elements that has been stored into the array. Now, here, what array does is it identifies the elements that is present in the array in terms of index. So what do you mean by index is, just like if you open a book, there will be some page number which is called as index, right? So you can just go to the last uh, few pages of your book and it will say a page called index, and it will be referring which page is located, I mean which content is located at which page, right? So it gives you a reference. In the same way, in array, it will be indexing the position of the elements so that you can exactly retrieve only a specific value that is needed. So how does that indexing works? So indexing is nothing but it gives a position to identify where exactly the element is. And if you had really heard me saying this word, saying array is an ordered list of elements, which means if you add a value here, it will always be in the third position. Suppose if you see Bangalore, Bangalore is the second element that you have added, right? That is because it has a position of second. So now how do you represent using array? So array uses this index wherein it uses the number to identify that. And in array, the indexing begins with 0, wherein the first element is represented by 0th index and second element is represented by first index, and going forward, the next element will be referred by second. Suppose if you have one more element, then that index will be 3. So please remember, indexing or mapping in array begins with 0. So it's not like first element. Yeah, this value, whatever that we are seeing, Adam, is the first element. But in an array, to identify it, the index begins with 0. Okay, so remember, that's the only difference between the regular numbering and array. In array, the indexing begins with 0 and then goes on with 1 and 2. So zeroth value or zeroth index of this array represents the first element. So remember like this. Zeroth index refers to what? First element. And then first first index represents the second element. And then second index represents third element. Okay, so like this it keeps going. Suppose if you have another value, then the third index represents the fourth value. Okay, it keeps on going. So this is the same concept what you will be seeing, and the fourth index represents the fifth element. Okay, now this is how you will be working, and this is how you will be able to get the value from this. And now, how exactly are you going to get the value out of this array? So now if you see individually, each one of them is a single entity, right? Whereas you are storing completely as an array. But if you see individually, each one of them is a scalar variable or a single entity that you are storing. So when you are retrieving a single value, what kind of variable that you will use? Generally, to store a single value, you will be using a scalar variable. So in the same concept, now to retrieve a particular value from an array, which is a single entity, you are going to represent it as a scalar variable. So we will say dollar and the name of the array or the string that you have given. So now if you say dollar and the variable name, it is supposed to give me a single entity value, right? But now this is an array. So how can you retrieve a single value from this array? So that is why we have to say dollar array, but we are not giving every value but a specific value. So in order to get a specific value, you have to use square brackets, and within this you will say the index number of that particular element which you want to retrieve. So here now, if you note, if you want the first value, then you have to say dollar array name and 0. So this will give you what? 0 Adam. And if you say dollar array of 1, and this will return the first index value, that is the second element. And if you say dollar array of 2, and it will retrieve you the second index. So what does second index points to? Third element. What is the third element? 68. Getting it? On how do you retrieve it? So again, going back to the basics, because every single value is a scalar variable, and now you are not retrieving the complete value. If you want a specific value, it has to be a scalar variable only. So that is why we will say dollar and the array name, but this is going to be an array. So you are not just retrieving everything. So you need to give a specific value. So that value can be given by the index number, and the syntax for that is bracket and the index number. Okay, so let us try to use the same as the program and see how we can store some value and get the output. Okay, so I'm gonna create a new file. Okay, so the very first line has to be this. Okay, and now let us first try to create a array. So I will say emp details. That means I'm just creating a array called employee details, and the value for that I will store as, okay, so this is the name. Okay, and say this is the team that I work for, and say this is the location that I sit. Okay, and fine, let me take this 3. Okay, so what is that I've done? We have initialized, or we have created a array called employee underscore details with this values. So now to retrieve it, how do you retrieve? Let's use the normal print statement. Okay, and here if you say name or first element of emp details is equal to dollar emp underscore details, and what is that we are trying to get? We are trying to get the first element. So first element is represented by the zeroth index. So we'll say 0. Okay. So let's run Perl-C. Okay, there's no syntax. So here you see you're getting the first element, that is Adam. And how did we get? It is using the index number. So the same thing if you want to retrieve the other ones. Okay. So let us quickly change it. I'll say second element. And here, how do you represent the second element? It will be represented by the first index. Okay. And the third element will be represented by the second index. Okay, you see? So index of 0 will represent this, index of 1 will represent this, and index of 2 will represent this value. So now if we run, you see, correspondingly with respect to the index number, it retrieves the specific value that you have stored. So try to be clear. You are creating a array which is a multiple values, wherein inside that, if you see, we are storing single values, right? So each single value is nothing but a scalar variable, and in order to retrieve it, you have to use the type called scalar, because we are retrieving a single value or single elements. So for that, we always have to represent it using the scalar variable. Hence we will be saying dollar and the name of the array that we have created, and then we will be giving the specific index number of whatever element that you want. So if you say index of 0, it is going to be the first element, and then the next index of 1 represents the second element, and going forward the second element or the third element is represented by second index. So like this the numbering keeps increasing. So the index begins with always 0. And what will happen, suppose if you print everything. Suppose if I say, if I just print completely. So what I'm doing, I'm not printing any specific element in an array. I'm just trying to print the complete array itself. So see how the output comes. What happens? So if you try to use the complete array, so it will give you a space separated values, all the values that you have. So we had 3 values stored into the array, right? Adam, DevOps, and BLR 3.4. So if you see, and it will try to print. So any point of time, if you want all the values that you have stored in an array, just use completely array, that is at the rate and the name of the array, and it will give you all the values that you have stored by a space separated value. Okay, if not, if you want a single value, then you have to use the scalar way, that is dollar the array name, and then you have to say the index. Getting it? Okay. Now We have, say, a situation wherein you need to know how many elements are present in an array. Okay, so you don't know what is the size of the array. So in that case, what you can do is, if you simply say dollar hash of that name, then it will give you the total index that is present. So that means here, okay, so if you simply say dollar hash and the name of the array, then it will give you how many ever elements that is present. Okay, so basically if you see, it's a number 0. Okay, so generally it will consider that there are only two elements, but literally we have three elements, right? So whenever you are trying to check for the total number of index in an array, it will always give you a value lesser than one that is existing. That means if you have three elements, right? So it will try to give you as 2. That is because the indexing begins with 0. So you have to always add one number to the existing total list so that you will get the exact value. Okay, so now let me show you. So here, if you simply say print total number of elements in emp details is dollar hash, okay, emp underscore details. You see, it says it is 2. That is because it is considering from the index, and it always gives you one value lesser than whatever you have. Okay, so suppose, say I have I add just one more value. Okay, so what will happen? Now it will be giving me the total number of elements as 3. That is, whatever total number of elements you have minus 1 is what it will be giving, because the index number always begins with 0. So generally when you are trying to take a count, 0 doesn't come into the picture. That's why it considers from 1. So 1, 2, 3 is 3 elements is what it says. You see? So whenever you are trying to get the total number of elements in an array using this dollar hash, you always have to add one number to it so that you will get. So now if it gives me 2, then I have to assume that there is 2 plus 1, that is 3 elements in it. And if it gives me 3, then I have to add 3 plus 1, that is 4. So I will be taking it at there are 4 elements in the array. Okay, so that is how you have to consider the size of the array. That is, it always gives you one value lesser than the total number of elements present. So sometimes it might be handy that you want to know how many values that you're keeping, because now so far whatever that I did is we stored the value in the beginning, right? So this is hard coded value. Hard coded means we are assigning some value to the array, and every time when the program runs, it will always have the same value. That is what we call it as hard coded. Now what if in the runtime you want to create some values? Because it is not always necessary that you have to store some value and you have to always use it. If you want to generate an array during runtime, that is, you want to pass the values or modify the content of array, then how is that going to happen? So for that purpose, you can do using these functions or statements that is available in the array. So how exactly you're going to do? So if you have a necessity to add a new value to an array or remove a value from the array, then we will be using these specific functions. Okay, So let us see how we are going to use this. So for instance, now if you want to add a new element to the array, so how is that you're going to add? So if you want to add a new element, now we know that array, it is always fixed. That means if you add a value, whatever the index or the positioning that you have, it will be the same. Suppose if you see here, Bangalore is always the second element and its index is always 1, right? And if you say this 68 is the third element or the index is 2, and that way if you add a value to an array, it's always fixed. So in that case, now there are two ways of adding an element. That is, either you can add an element at the end or you can add the element at the beginning. So based on how you add the value either in the beginning or at the end, the positioning will also change, because whatever is the first value that is present in an array, its index is 0. Okay, now if you try to add a value at the beginning, then instead of Adam, whatever that you're adding there will take the 0th index. Okay, so how exactly is going to work? So we have a function called push. Okay, so what does push do? So if you have a value that you want to add at the end of the array, then you will be using push. So for this, what you will be doing is you will say push and you will say the name of the array, comma, whatever value that you want to pass. So whatever value that you are passing, now that will be stored into this array at the end. Okay, so now here, for example, this is the value that you have, right? So now suppose if I say push and the name of the array and a new value. Okay, suppose if I say fourth, this is my value that I'm adding. Okay, so if I give the value like this, then what it is going to do, literally you are adding a new value or an element called fourth, and at the end, that is what push is going to do. So here literally it is going to add a value called fourth, and now the index of this will become 3. Okay, so that is how it will be adding it at the end. So let us try to do that and see. Okay, so now, so if you see, if I say employee details, it is going to give me all the values, right? See, now it gave me first, second element, third element, and then it gives me the what? Complete value right now, correct? So let me delete this. So right now we have 3 elements in an array, and when you say EMP details, it gives you the complete list of values that you have. Okay, you see, you got the complete 3 values, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new element. So I'll say print adding a new element at the end using push. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll say push, and what is the name of our array? It is emp underscore details, and then what is the value that you want to add? Say suppose I want to add uh, what? Okay, maybe okay, I'll add the same number, maybe my pin code. So this is what I'm adding. Okay, so now Let's print this once again and see the difference. Okay, so you see here, until here you had only 3 elements, but now we are adding a new element called 68 at the 4. And now if you see the content of the array, it is actually what? One more element that is added at the end. So when you say push, it adds the value at the end. So now correspondingly, if you want the fourth element, if you say fourth element of at the rate employee details is equal to, how do you get it? Emp details. And what will be the index of this fourth value? That is 3. That is one lesser value is what you have to give. Okay. And you see, the third index or the fourth element is 68. So whenever you say push, it will always take the value and it will put it at the end of the array. Okay. So I'm just trying to show you. Is that clear? So this is before we did a push, and as soon as we did a push, then it adds a value to the end, and that is what you are getting it. Okay. Now the same thing, if you want to add a value at the beginning, then you have to use shift. Okay, sorry, you have to give it as unshift. So push means you are adding it at the end. Suppose if you want to add at the beginning, and then you have to use unshift, wherein unshift will take a value whatever that you are passing and it will add it to the beginning. Okay, so now let us try that itself. So now we had this, right? So simply what I'm going to do now is I'm unshift. So what is unshift going to do? We are adding a new element at the beginning of, okay, beginning using unshift. Okay, so now for this you will say unshift, and the same way you will say employee details, that is the name of the array, and followed by what new value you want. Okay, so maybe I will add my last name. Okay, so I'm just adding a value called M. Okay, this is nothing but my last name. That is what I'm adding as the first element. Okay, so now if you see, let's see what is the content of that. And now whenever you add a new value to the beginning, what will happen? So we had some value like this, right? Now if I add a new element, say for example M here, what will happen? Then the 0th index is being picked up by this. The next index of 1 goes to this, and then this is how it keeps going. So now if you try to see, M is the first element, so the index 0 will always go to this. But whereas in the last time we saw, 0th index is always pointed by Adam, right? Here. But now if you add a new element to the beginning, the 0th index will be taken care by this specific value that you're trying to pass. Okay, so I'm going to print this once again to show you. Okay, so once again I am trying to print the index of first element, second element, third element. See the difference, how it happens. So here if you see, when we had this value in the array, the first element was Adam, then it was DevOps, and then it was BLR 3.4. Then what did we do? We pushed an element to the end. That is why it became the fourth element. But now, if you add a value to the beginning using unshift, now look at the elements that is stored in an array. It is not Adam which is in the beginning. Now M became the first element. So now what is the first element in the array? M. What is the second element? Adam. What is the third element? DevOps. And correspondingly, fourth will be this, and this will be the fifth value or the fifth element. Getting it? So unshift means you are adding it at the beginning. And since you are adding at the beginning, that will be the first element. And the first element will always be represented by the zeroth index. So it takes the position. So push means at the end you are adding a value. Unshift means you are adding a value at the beginning. Getting it? What's the difference between push and unshift, and how do you add a value that is either at the end using push or to the beginning using unshift?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, now this is what we saw from how do you add a value. Now, at any point of time, if you want to remove a value from an array, how is that you can do? So it is the same concept wherein if you wanted to add a value, you either added at the end or at the beginning, right? In the same way, if you want to delete a value from an array, then either you have to choose whether you are going to delete it from the end or delete it from the beginning. Now, to do that, we have two functions. So the first one is called pop, wherein pop is the opposite of push. So what is push going to do? Push will add the value at the end. So the opposite of that is pop. Pop means it is going to remove the value from the end of the array. That is what it is going to do. Okay, so let us try the same thing now. So here, let's say print pop. Okay, so I'm going to say print deleting an element from the at the end using pop. Okay, so simply if I say pop, and for this all you need to do is give the array name, because you're not saying any value. So obviously whatever is the last value it is going to delete. So I don't have to specify the name of the value or the element. You simply say the pop, which means the last whatever element is present, it will delete it. Okay, so now if you try to print the elements in the array, see what happens. So now here you see when you did unshift by adding, then we had how many elements? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now out of this, what is the last element? It is 68, right? So when you say pop, whatever element is present in the end, it will delete. And now if you see, you will be getting back the array with deleted value. So now the array has only 4 elements. Correspondingly, the indexes will also be there. So now the same way, if you want to delete a element from the beginning, then we have to use shift. So again, shift is nothing but the opposite of unshift. That is, if you say unshift, it will add a value at the beginning. So if you want to delete an element from the beginning, you simply say shift and it will delete the value from the beginning. Okay. So okay, I'm just going to say shift. Okay, so all I'm doing is shift. So now if you run, see what happens. So we added this at the end, and then we added one value at the beginning, and then when you said pop, it deletes one character or element at the end, and then when you say shift, it deletes one element from the beginning. So now the current value in the array is this 3. So now what will be the 0th index, or what will be the first element of this array? It will be again Adam. Okay, so this is how every time when you call this pop or shift, it will be deleting a value. Say, suppose here, if I call this shift 2 times, what will happen now? Any guess what will be the output? So I did the shift, so this M got deleted, right? And this is the current content of the array. So if I did the shift once again, what will happen?
The next element, and the next element would get deleted. Like Adam will.
Yeah, so the array will contain only these two values. Okay, so let's try to run. You see? So it's simple as it looks. Every time when you call this, it is going to delete a element, and shift means delete the element from the beginning. The same thing if you call pop 2 times, what will happen? Okay, I'm going to do this. So tell me what will be the output. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a pop 2 times and I'm doing a shift 1 time. So what will be the content of the element at the end? So tell me with this example. So here, okay, so I want you guys to tell me the output before I run. So currently, what is the content of the array? This is the content, right?
Yes.
So this is the content, okay? Now from this content, what is that we did? So first we tried to push a value. So push means it will add a value at the end, right? So what does that happen? If you say push, it will say the new value as 68. So this is the content of the array. And then what is that we did? We did a unshift by adding a new value at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now after this, I am doing pop 2 times here. After this, I am doing pop 2 times and shift 1 time. Then tell me what will be the output. So what happens if I do pop 2 times?
Only pop 2 times. Last two elements will be deleted, and shift 1 time. First element will get deleted. So
So
Adam and DevOps will. And those are the only two will be
so
remaining.
all these things will get deleted, and finally the output will be Adam and DevOps.
Yeah.
Getting the difference? So since
Yeah.
here you had this many elements, but if you did pop 2 times, so it deletes the last two elements, and then you have left with this three values. And then when you do a shift, it deletes from the beginning. So the remaining thing is only 2 elements. Getting it?
Yeah.